Hello, and welcome to TED Talks. Our security edition today is focused on enterprise security and risk-based alerting better together. TED Talks is a series of short webinars focused on features and best practices. We value you, our customer, and want you to continue in your Splunk journey. Our experts help create these tips and tricks, and we want you to leverage them in your daily role. I'm Jairo Camacho, a product marketing specialist for user entity and behavior analytics. I'm excited to share more information today on how ES and RBA are better together. Later on, I will be joined by my colleague, Jim Apker, a staff security strategist here at Splunk for over 6 years, who is also the chief evangelist for this thing called RBA. Today, we're going to talk about how SOX has benefited immensely from RBA. Then we'll dive into why it's important to make the transition from having a reactive to a proactive security approach. We'll also share how ES has natively integrated RBA functionality. Afterwards, Jim is going to walk us through a great demo, and then we will cover additional resources available to help you take advantage of Splunk Enterprise Security. Our team will be available for Q&A throughout the TED Talk in the Q&A feature. And if you watch a recorded version of this webinar, please continue the conversation through the Splunk community website for any follow-up questions. Stay tuned for a few poll questions at the end to get your feedback. For those who attended our first RBA TED Talk earlier this year, this slide should look somewhat familiar. It highlights the ways in which RBA improves the performance of the SOC. Our customers have shared with us that they have experienced dramatically reduced alerting by 60 to 70%, increased their true positive rates, had an easier time aligning and operationalizing MITRE ATT&CK, decoupled the ingest rate and the analytics from the operational spend in their SOC, gained the ability to look across longer timelines to detect low and slow attacks, and gained the ability to map against leading cybersecurity industry frameworks opposed to the prevailing general use case-based approach. Security teams traditionally have taken a reactive approach to security. Let's see how RBA has allowed teams to reorient resources in order to become more proactive. Reactive security practices have prevailed for far too long. The continuous loop of building detections, shipping those to analysts who spend the bulk of their days investigating and triaging has made it more difficult for teams to take a more forward-looking stance. RBA breaks the cycle, freeing up valuable resources so your team can prioritize tasks like threat hunting and adversary simulation, allowing your SOC to embrace a more proactive approach to security. Threat hunting exercises allows teams to test assumptions like, can we protect against lateral movement? Something seen throughout many advanced persistent threat scenarios. Threat hunters can create a series of hypotheses and test them out in their ecosystem to validate or invalidate them. This process is incredibly important for identifying data and process gaps, while adversary simulation allows your team to train like they would fight. Your sim is comprised of rules, which should be tested regularly to ensure effectiveness. Splunk's attack range and new alignment with cybersecurity frameworks like MITRE allow for the validation of your ES detections in your own security posture, so your team knows with certainty the integrity of your analytics. Enterprise Security 6.4 will have native RBA functionality for cloud and on-prem. Here are 5 of the most important things to know. Annotation Framework. Cybersecurity frameworks like MITRE or KillChain can provide your team guidance for detections. Start checking which techniques are most important for your organization, then start crafting detections. And once you start running out of detections, know which data sources you need to start ingesting to expand your security coverage. Risk Factor Framework. Whenever something interesting is found, we tend to focus on the risk object, such as user or system. By leveraging the Asset and Identities Framework within ES, you get important context, which is then used to determine the risk score. So let's say a detection was built and involves someone in the C-suite. Given their position and access to sensitive information, then that risk score would increase by a lot. MITRE ATT&CK Data Dictionary. Easily align detections to MITRE techniques. The data dictionary enriches the finding based on the technique. We have added the tactic, known threat groups, known software, and more. expect all of the important MITRE context attached to your detections. Threat objects now captures indicators of compromise alongside the majority of detections, lowering the barrier for entry for local threat intelligence and threat hunting. Updated risk adaptive response action. Normally when something interesting is found in ES, a notable event is created. In the past, this wasn't optimized for RBA, but it has been updated so you can now attribute risk to multiple entities and carry forward in rich context. Now, let's see it in action. Now, handing it over to Jim to see what we have discussed in action.
Thank you very much, Jairo. Let's take a look at what is new in Enterprise Security version 6.4, specific to this attribution concept. We'll get started by taking a look at the risk analysis dashboard. This should be familiar to folks that have used Enterprise Security or played bots in the past. In this case, it's a demo system that I have set up based on bots version 4. I do have lots of risk attributions in place and risk notables that we're going to take a look at here shortly. But again, this should look familiar if you've played bots version v4. With all of those risk objects bottom left, you'll notice also towards the middle there that we do have the annotation framework built into the screen by default as well. Let's get started by taking a look at some of the risk rules. And you remember previously, for those that have deployed using SA-RBA in the past, much of what we did it was done manually with SPL behind the scenes. And in this case, let's open up a link specific to the Microsoft Azure detection. In this case, it's a standard risk rule. What we're looking for is a user that changed the password of another user that's not the same as the source. This should look quite a bit different in terms of SPL. All we have is really just SPL specific to the constraint. What's missing is all of that stuff that we used to do in the past with SA-RBA. All of the pipe collect macros, all of the risk scoring up. The only thing that we've really got left here that we'll take care of here shortly, maybe in version 6.5, is that we're manually specifying threat objects. More on that in just a bit, but if we scroll down, this is all new to version 6.3 and 6.4. It's the annotation framework. So what we're doing here, you can align to any cybersecurity framework of your choosing. You can even create your own frameworks or extend existing frameworks. Out of the box, we do ship with a data dictionary specific to MITRE ATT&CK. So when you do create your SPL and your risk rules that map back to MITRE ATT&CK techniques or sub-techniques, you can choose those here. In this case, I did predefine this existing sub-technique for this particular correlation rule. Towards the bottom, one other big important improvement. When we take a look at what's different in terms of the adaptive response action, it has been updated such that, again, now we can specify risk messages inside of the adaptive response action, including tokens. So this is all brand new. And again, before we had to manually manage the risk message in SPL. Also now the ability to add additional attributions within one correlation rule is new. One important note here is that as you define your risk object and your risk object type right here, it's important to note that this is a base risk score. Right, so we did this in the past as well. We'll shift gears here shortly and we're going to talk about what's different in terms of how we risk score that up. That concept is called risk factoring. If we switch gears and we take a look at the risk factoring framework, we can go right into content management. And you'll see a bunch of new stuff down here, workbench panels. I'm interested in the risk factors. And again, this is all brand new. What happens behind the scenes is we take that base risk score, and these are applied globally against anything that is in that risk index destined to the risk analysis data model. And we can do these quick checks based on that risk score and multiply that up or make it additive if we need to. If we take a look at one of these, let's look at one of the frothy ones. Actually, I'm going to expand it out to show you all of them. And in this case, let's just look at this one here. So as a risk factor, what we're essentially doing is replacing what we did in the past manually with SPL. And we're essentially saying that when we see something land inside the risk index, if the source priority is set to critical, let's go ahead and take that base risk score and multiply that by 1.5. And that's all we're doing. And then these are additive as we go up the line there and we see multiple matches. So that's very interesting. We can look at advanced, we can do regexes and likes interesting concepts to that. But again, the whole point of this is that it's scalable, important to call out, and it is documented that this actually occurs when we populate that risk analysis data model entry. What that looks like behind the scenes is this, and this is a big deal. So in this case, I'm just going to query the risk analysis data model. I'm going to grab the first entry for A Grady, and if we expand this event, and again, this is directly from the risk data model, we see lots of interesting stuff that's carried over. If you remember, previously we carried forward the MITRE ATT&CK technique ID. Behind the scenes, as part of this risk factoring framework, we will expand that and run that MITRE ATT&CK lookup against that, so that now we can add to that automatically descriptions, detections, platforms, software, threat groups if applicable down here, software types, reference URLs. The tactics are added. These can be multi-value depending on how it's set up in the MITRE ATT&CK data dictionary. So lots of interesting concepts get tagged along inside that risk analysis data model. Also, let me show you a risk score real quick. So we see that we have a base risk score of 5. And in this case, we did actually see a match. So again, from the risk factoring perspective, we matched on one of those factors. It was multiplicative by a factor of 1.1. And you'll see that we did actually increase under calculated risk score the score to 5.5. Right, so that's essentially how risk scoring now works. And again, it's important to call out that this process occurs as we ingest from the index into the risk analysis data model. So all good stuff, very scalable. Let's switch gears and we'll talk about incident management. So again, what we want to do is, in this case, I did create a risk notable specific to looking back 7 days, the MITRE ATT&CK tactics exceeding 3 or more, as well as the sources exceeding 4 or more there. So let's pick on A Grady again. When we expand A Grady, these are customizable. You can do whatever you want. In this case, because it's focused on attack tactics, I opted to show just the MITRE ATT&CK tactics observed with this particular notable. And again, important to call out, nothing new here. It's the same that we did with SARBA. We're just querying that risk analysis data model. And in this case, the story that's being told is specific to the risk object, A Grady. And we did see multiple rules that get triggered, multiple risk rules. So command and control, detected, malware, suspicious activity related to escalation, system info discovery, right? So some of this stuff is very, very noisy stuff. Nothing new here in terms of SARBA compared to what we're doing in Enterprise Security version 4. I do want to call out this, though. This is pretty interesting. These are default workflows out of the box. So we've got now this workbench that we can customize. It's a quick pop-up. So now we've got interesting panels that can be created just as part of a standard workflow. In addition to this, which has been here for quite a while, if we take a look at the embedded investigative workbench, we also now have panels that we can explore that are specific to risk analysis data model and these attributions. And you can also customize. In this case, I customize for the attributions. You can customize your own workflows, much like what we've done in the past with the manual process. And I'll shift gears back to that real quick. And this will look familiar to those that have deployed SARBA in the past. Let's sort by urgency. We'll pick on A Grady again. Let's zip on down here, and you'll notice, just like we've done in the past, you can always create your own customized investigative workflows as well. So in this case, depending on whether it's a user or system, like this particular customized dashboard will toggle between identity and asset. What is also really nice is that we carry forward, in this case I'm looking for A Grady. What we can do is we can use this lookup to carry forward any of this kind of context that's seen anywhere within that risk index. So maybe we do have specific to maybe phishing email addresses that show up as the risk object. Not a problem. We're going to expand this identity behind the scenes. We're going to take a wider look at all of the risk objects associated with that user. And then same thing here, tactics, techniques, threat objects, maybe a different view on that in terms of scoring and how things are played out regarding the number of threat objects that are seen. In this case, of type command, we've taken the time to capture alongside our correlation rules, interesting findings, possible IOCs. So in this case, command was seen 93 different times. Nice low risk score. The average risk score is 5.5, depending on the asset or identity context that we inherit from the risk factoring framework, with a total aggregate attribution of 511. In this case, attack techniques, right? Depending on how we're actually building the risk rules, you can see what the contribution for each of these pieces of information can be. And then again, nothing new down here. It's the ability to take a look at your risk rules or your techniques over time through an interesting viz. So there's a lot to consume there. So there's a lot new within enterprise security, and I'm really excited to see this ship here in November. That's it for this quick tour. Again, my name is Jim Apker. Cheers.
We have some great resources available here for you to learn more about Enterprise Security 6.4. Check out the TED Talks and .com sessions. They are filled with great insights. You will receive these links and much more in a follow-up email. Finally, don't forget we also have an incredible community of Splunk users on our community website. There you will find a Q&A section that you can use to learn more about Enterprise Security 6.4. Also feel free to participate in the new discussion section with Security TED Talks and Splunk Ideas, the place to submit any ideas you might have for product enhancements. There are a few poll questions that we would like you to answer to make sure we are on track with these TED Talks. Did this TED Talk resonate with goals you have or may have for a shift from a reactive towards proactive function in your SOC? Are you actively planning or have you employed strategies regarding threat hunting or adversary simulation? Where are you in leveraging MITRE ATT&CK to bolster your security posture? Finished, in progress, committed / planning, no plans, or using another framework? We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Please tune back in for future TED Talks. We are excited to share the series with you. Thank you again.